Catherine, and welcome to my podcast. Today is Monday, March 19th, 2018, and I'm coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I live with my husband Andrew and our dog Iggy. You can find me on Ravelry as Hey I'm Catherine Knits, and you can find me on Instagram at Hey I'm Catherine _the podcast. So, welcome to episode 6. Whether this is your first time joining me or whether you are a returning viewer, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to spend some time with me, seeing what I am up to. It is a beautiful sunny day today, which is why I'm podcasting today. It's supposed to be cloudy like for the rest of the week, and I still do not have podcasting lights, so I am at the mercy of Mother Nature. I also would like to draw your attention to my beautiful background, which is slightly different from my other beautiful background from episode 5. The way I was set up for episode 5 filming when I tried it today, the glare on my glasses was like insane, like even worse than that. It was really bad. So I flipped everything 90 degrees, but then had to cover up a whole new mess behind me. So I promise it will not always be like this. There is a time in the not too distant future, like not in days, but in the span of weeks and not months, where I will be able to kind of tackle all of this stuff and end up with hopefully a more conducive background for podcasting. But you'll have to stay tuned and wait to see when that comes. What else is going on? The weather is, it snowed like 20 centimeters again this weekend. March in Calgary. March is traditionally our snowiest month. It is the month that we get the most snow out of any month in the winter. So it's not out of the ordinary that we would get snow in March. I just think we've had so much snow this winter. Like we already have 1.5 meters of snow, which is a lot more than we normally have. We had far fewer Chinooks than typical, so everything didn't melt. The roads are crazy. Like the ruts in our back alley are about 8 inches deep. So there are people when they're pulling into their garages, they actually get stuck in the ruts if they're spaced incorrectly, so that's kind of not great. But I think we are all anxiously awaiting the arrival of actual spring, where we get rain instead of snow. That's kind of like the line that demarcates spring from winter in Calgary, is when the precipitation is liquid instead of solid. So anyways, fingers crossed that comes soon, but in the meantime, I've been like stuffing beautiful colored yarn into my eyeballs to make it feel like spring in my head. So we'll see how that goes. But let's get cracking. So we are going to start off as usual with Goat Off My Needles, which is where I talk about finished objects. So this is another long-awaited finished object. I have a nice little stockpile that I've made for myself, which is one of the benefits of not podcasting for months and months and months prior to episode 5. So in the fall, I was organizing my stash, and I actually made not terrible headway, and I found a bunch of stuff that of course I forgot that I had, because that's what happens when you stuff. That does make sense. When you stuff stuff in bins, put things in bins is probably a clearer way to say that. So when you put your yarn in bins and then cover them up and then stack other bins on top of them, you tend to forget what is in those bins, especially when they are not clear. So I was going through the bins and I found 3 skeins of Drake by Estelle Yarns. And this one in particular is a super bulky yarn. It's 100 meters per 100 grams. So it's a super bulky yarn, And it is, I have a little bit left over here, and it is a thick and thin yarn. So it goes from thick to thin, and then back to thick again. And it's also highly variegated yarn, so you have everything from like these blues, which are kind of like teal, and then it goes into brown, and there's a little bit of green in there, which is not showing up on the camera, but believe me, it's there. Um, Maybe this is a better place to show it. So there's the green. It's kind of like toothpastey green. So it's just a really, really pretty yarn. And I think I got this at Villa Kula Handmade, which is a yarn store here in Calgary. And I picked up 3 skeins of it, or 3 balls, however you want to say it. And my intent at the time was to pair it with brown yarn, like I had a chocolate brown yarn that I already had, and make it like a strip, a contrast strip across the chest of a sweater when I eventually learned how to knit sweaters, which I have done since, but I didn't know how to knit sweaters at the time. But of course, being a relatively new knitter and not knowing anything about anything at the time, this is a super bulky yarn. The chocolate brown yarn I already had was worsted weight. They really would not have gone together all that well. So I was digging through my stash and I came up with these 3 skeins, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, and we were going away for the weekend that following weekend, and I thought it would be fun to just cast on a big chunky knit cowl. It would knit up super quickly. It would be mindless knitting when we were away for the weekend. I could get rid of 3 balls out of my stash, and then I would have something nice to wear all winter shoved into my jacket. So I wasn't really following a pattern. All of the pattern notes are up on my Ravelry page, and I'm calling this my Mountain Capelet-ish knit. So the Mountain Capelet is a free pattern from Purl Soho, which is a yarn store in New York City, which I've been fortunate enough to visit twice. And they wrote this pattern for their house brand, or I don't know if it's their house brand, but they wrote it for super bulky yarn that they carry in store. So I was not following a pattern when I started. I just randomly cast on a number of stitches. I wanted it to be big and thick so I could jam it down into the neck of my jacket. So I didn't want it to be super tight like a turtleneck. And I also wanted it to be nice and big so it would fit over my head evenly, because I don't like it when I'm pulling stuff over my head and it like messes up my hair or drags across my face and you get all the like yarn fluffies in your mouth. I don't like that. I need clearance space when I'm pulling stuff over my head. So I just cast on a bunch of stitches, joined in the round, and started knitting every round and just kind of went for it. And I got through the first ball and joined the second ball and got through the second ball and joined the third ball, and then started getting really, really bored. And then I kind of looked at the size of garment that I was getting, and it was going to be enormous. Like, it was not going to fit in any jacket. It wasn't going to sit properly because it was really wide on my shoulders. So I just kind of sat there and stared at it for a bit and thought, well, what do I do? Like, what do I do now? Do I rip all of it out and start again? It's not my favorite thing to do. Or do I just keep going and make something that I'm probably never going to wear? This tube is much too big in every dimension. So that kind of wasn't a good option either. And then I remembered this capelet pattern. So I pulled it up quickly on my phone and looked at the decreases and figured out what I had to do. So I didn't have the same number of stitches as it called for in the pattern, but you can do paired decreases with any stitch count as long as it's an even number of stitches. So I kind of fudged my way down to an even number of stitches, as in I did a knit 2 together to get from an odd number of stitches to an even number of stitches, and then just did decreases as called for in the pattern until it got a little bit smaller, and then decided to kind of keep going even from there, and then knit until I almost ran out of yarn. I was weighing my yarn as I was doing every round because I wanted to use up as much as possible, but with it being a thick and thin yarn and it's not spun at kind of even intervals, it made it really hard to kind of judge where I was going to end up. So I did end up with a little bit left over. I have a few grams left over. The actual amount is on my Ravelry page, as are all my stitch counts and everything like that. But at the end of all of that, I ended up with this. So let's have a little chat about this. So like I said, I just knit every round. So the bottom hem and the collar roll, because that's what stockinette knitting around does. Like, that's what happens. But I really, really like how this yarn knit up. There was a little bit of pooling at the bottom, or I guess it's not really pooling, it's kind of striping, so it's okay. I don't like unintentional pooling in my garments. I prefer everything to either be random or to be purposely pooled, like on the Pool and Conquer shawl, or I like it to be striped. I don't, I just prefer it to not be unintentionally pooled. So there kind of wasn't any other pooling anywhere else in this garment that kind of shows up in a big way. So that was just a happy accident, because, like I said, I wasn't really following a pattern. I do love how this yarn knit up. I mean, you can see all of the different colors, and you can see the definition from the thin parts of the yarn as compared to the thick parts of the yarn. And it turned out really, really nicely. I think it's such a pretty fall colorway, but it's an unexpected fall colorway. Like, it's not your typical fallen leaves colorway. So I like that. It also reminded me a little bit of the feathers on mallard duck wings. So we have mallard ducks all up and down the Bow River here in Calgary, and we live like 6 blocks from the river, so we see them all the time. And so the blues and teals and the different brown shades reminded me of the iridescent patches that the ducks have on their wing feathers. So I thought that was kind of nice. So it's really pretty, and it's quite warm and snuggly. And the shoulder decreases are super simple, just paired decreases with knit two togethers and slip slip knits. Just like pretty much every other, like if you've done a sock or a hat or literally anything, you have done this and it is okay. So that turned out quite nicely, and it actually fits me really well. I'm not going to put this on because the last time I did, I'm also wearing another sweater because it is cold here, because of course it is, and they got stuck together, and it was kind of really difficult to get it off again without looking like a total weirdo on camera. So I'm just not going to put it on again. But it fits my shoulders really nicely. It has a nice little roll neck. Now, the one thing that I wish I had done differently is I wish I had decided to do the shoulder decreases earlier on in the third ball of yarn, because that would have given me a slightly higher neck, which would have kept me a little bit warmer, and it also would have made it shorter in the body. So this, as it stands now, fits almost like a sweater. It comes down when I pull it on, and my arms are by my sides. It comes down to my elbows. So that is perfect for being at home if I'm on the computer or if I'm knitting or something and my arms get cold. I always pull my sleeves up anyways to about my elbows. So it works really well for that. But if I were to wear this under a jacket or under a coat, it would be really difficult to get my arms in the sleeves of the coat, and then this would be bunched up all like around my bust line here, and it would just look weird until my coat came off and I could fix it. And I think it would also feel really uncomfortable. I do have a couple of capes, because why would you not have capes? And that is the problem that I run into with them when I'm putting them under my jacket, is that they bunch up in weird ways and it's really, really uncomfortable. Even if I'm driving or if I'm doing anything, it's not great until I can get that coat off and everything can settle down again. So that is the one thing that I wish I had done differently, is that I wish I had started the shoulder decreases sooner so that it would sit higher up on my body and I would have a higher neck to kind of keep me warm. But too bad, so sad, it did not work out that way. I'm also kind of amused by the fact that if I had picked up maybe 2 to 3 more skeins of this, I could have legitimately made myself a sweater using like this cast on number and kind of this little recipe. I would have done a little bit longer in the body, or I would have done ribbing so that it wouldn't roll up, and then I just would have added sleeves, and it would have been just like a sweater. But anyways, next time. So yeah, so this is my mountain capelet-ish sort of thing. It's nice and cozy. I like the colors. It turned out well. It was a great, easy knit for sitting in front of the wood-burning fireplace when we were gone for the weekend. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So that is the only finished object that I'm talking about today, because all of my other finished objects kind of have big long stories attached to them, and I didn't want to make this episode enormously long. I'm kind of trying to ease you all back into it. So that is it for Goat Off My Needles. So we're moving right along to works in progress, which I call Alpaca, my project bags. And the work the whip pile continues, not casting on anything that is not a work in progress or something that I already started and decided not to frog until everything is done. So in the fall, I took a stranded colorwork class at my local yarn store, which is the Loop here in Calgary. And the pattern that we were knitting is the Stranded Bunnet by Kate Davies. And I don't have the pattern printed out, but I will put a picture in here. So it is a very simple stranded color work project with a main color and a contrast color. Now I chose two contrast colors on the advice of my teacher because she thought it would be a cool effect, and I kind of tend to agree. So I am knitting this out of Drops Baby Merino, which I think is a sport weight yarn, but it's really springy. So if you pull it really tight, it's like fingering, and if you let it bounce back a little bit, it is sport weight. So my main color, I don't know if these colors have colorway names. I doubt it. I bet they're probably just numbers. When I find the ball bands, which I know I have around here somewhere, and I just could not find them, when I find the ball bands, all of this information will be on my project page, on my Ravelry project page. So if you want to know the colorways that I used, you can go there and check it out. So I'm using this really nice, like, deep electric blue for my main color. And then my contrast colors are this beautiful hot pink. Like, it's making my camera freak out a little bit because it's like a really bright, vivid pink. And then I'm also using this bright, like, fluorescent orange. So these are the colors, which I think they're just such happy colors. Such happy colors. And this is what I have so far. So I have finished my cast on. I have done the 2x2 ribbing, the corrugated ribbing all the way around. And as you can see, I've been alternating my contrast colors every row, starting with pink and then going to orange and all the way up. And I've just started the body of my hat, which then I knit the whole body, and then we have colored stranded color work again on the crown in the crown decreases, and then I'm done. So I think that the two contrast colors stranded together give a really neat effect. Like you end up with kind of like a coral color from afar, which makes sense because coral is pink and orange put together. And then up close, it's like this really neat pixelated effect. The other thing that's really great about this pattern, especially as a beginner color work project, is that you're only ever knitting with 2 colors per row at most. Assuming that you don't do something crazy like 3 contrast colors or 4 contrast colors. And also your stitches are, you're never doing more than 2 stitches in one yarn before you flip back and forth to the other one, so you don't need to be as concerned about catching floats as you do with longer runs. So yeah, my floats look pretty nice, I think. Look at those pretty floats. So stretchy. So I am knitting these on my ChiaoGoo interchangeables, and I'm using the US 4 or 3.5 millimeter tips, which is what was recommended in the pattern for the ribbing. And then when I switched to the body of the hat, I did not increase my needle size. And part of that is because my gauge is going crazy. I went from the tightest knitter ever. Like the first time I cast this hat on in my class, I went up 3 needle sizes to get gauge. And then the body of my hat, the reason I ripped it all back and started again was because the body of my hat was so loose, the stockinette was so loose that I knew I would never wear it. As it is, this hat is not going to be like a middle of winter hat. This is going to be a spring and fall, like dog walking in the morning hat. Even in the summertime, like even until June, the mornings in Calgary can be really, really cool, and that's when I'm out walking the dog. So I'll wear a toque or a hat of some sort, like every single day. Part of that is to hide my terrible bedhead, but part of that is because my ears get cold when I'm walking the dog, and she doesn't care. She needs her walk anyway. So this is definitely going to be a lighter weight hat. From looking at it, I'm a little bit concerned at how small it is, but this is supposed to be a kind of tighter fitting beanie style hat. I am going to knit the slouchy version of it, which instead of knitting 5.5 inches of the body, you knit 8 inches of the body before starting your crown decreases, just because I think I'm going to need the extra height to pull it down to cover my ears. I have a sneaking suspicion that this hat is going to be on the small side, but we are going to go with it. This is what happens when you do not do a gauge swatch. So my gauge was crazy with the first one, so tight that I had to go up crazy numbers of needle sizes. Now my gauge has tightened up, like, or loosened up an enormous amount. So I went down a bunch of needle sizes, but I just, even though it was only one needle size, going up one needle size from the size that you knit the ribbing on to the size that you knit the body of the hat on, I just didn't want to risk it. So I'm knitting it with the same needles. We're going to see how it goes. And yeah, now I'm in kind of the nice mindless part, just going around and around and around and around with just the one color, so it's one ball to wrangle, and we'll see how long it takes me. I'm hoping not long, because I already know what project I'm going to cast on, or I guess pick up next, which I will show you next. But anyways, I'm excited to see how this turns out. With the stranded color work in the crown, I'm going to do the same thing, where I'm going to do one round in the pink of the contrast color and one round in the orange of the contrast color all the way up. And that'll be it. That'll be my hat. I do know that this yarn is quite soft and gets a little bit pilly. When I pulled it out the first time, I ended up laundering it, which it's not like that sounds sick. I threw it in by accident. I meant to launder it. I purposely laundered it, and it just got a little bit pilly and soft, but I'm going to knit it up, and then I don't think that that's anything the gleaner can't handle. So anyways, that is the only work in progress that I have right now, is the Stranded Bunnet by Kate Davies, and her pattern is really well written. I find it very intuitive to follow, very easy to follow, and I already have a whole bunch of her other projects, like saved on Ravelry is what I want to cast on in the future. She has beautiful sweater designs and vest designs and gauntlets and all kinds of fun stuff. So that is my hat. Right now it's kind of an earwarmer, which this would also be kind of a fun earwarmer pattern. Just keep going in the corrugated ribbing a little bit longer, and then do another couple of rows and bind off, and there's your earwarmer. So that is it for alpaca, my project bags. So today we are going to do a little bit of useful yakking, which is where I talk about tools or tips that I've discovered from surfing the internet, nothing that I've ever come up with, or just things that kind of make crafting easier or less stressful. So as I was knitting my mountain capelet-ish, I decided to use my Lykke needle sets. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, you know what I mean. Anyone who's on Instagram knows exactly what these are. So these are Lykke wood needles. I think this is the gray denim look case. And by the way, this is not sponsored or anything like that. These people do not know who I am. I just decided to talk about this because I have them, and I talked about my Chiagoos at great length. So now I'm talking about the Lykkes. So I have the interchangeable needle set. which comes in like a billfold case like this. There's a little zippy pocket here that you could put your needle gauge in, or pattern, or stitch markers, or whatever. Then you open it up, you have all of your needle tips stored here, and they come in they're held in little loops of elastic that hold all your needles. And then there is another larger pocket, which gives you space for all of your cords in here. And then it comes with a whole bunch of cord stoppers and the little keys for tightening all your connections, which are on this side. And it also comes with a cord connector if you want to join two cords together and make a longer one. All of that is pretty standard for interchangeable needle kits. What makes this kit different, I think, is the crazy publicity juggernaut that ended up on Instagram. Like, people were insane for these needles. It was crazy. They would show up at a yarn store and they would be sold out within like an hour because people would buy them all online. It was crazy last year. So I think these are the gray driftwood needles, which I think part of the reason why everyone was so excited about these is people actually thought that it was driftwood that had been machined into needles. It is not actual driftwood. Like, someone did not go up and down the coast and get all this beautiful like gray weathered driftwood and make needles out of it. This is laminated birch, which is the same stuff that like the Knit Picks wood needles are made out of, and the same thing that I think Knitter's Pride needles are made out of as well. They just put a different color on it effectively when they painted it. That's kind of it. So I think that maybe drove a lot of like the desire behind them, because that would be a really neat concept to have like actual literal driftwood needles that have been weathered by sun and wind and water. That would be really cool. I would probably be into that. So I used these needles for 2 projects, and I will probably use them for other ones as well. And I have kind of some initial thoughts, so I just wanted to share them now, and then as I use the needles more, as I'm kind of progressing through, I'll be interested to see kind of how my opinion changes, if it does. So I just wanted to get this down for posterity. So the things that I liked about this needle set, I mean, obviously they're like super aesthetically pleasing. Everything is laid out in a really nice way. They also go up higher in their needle sizing than ChiaoGoo interchangeable kits do. I don't know about Addies because I don't have an Addie kit. And I don't know that I'll ever buy an Addie kit, but I guess never say never. I don't know. So my ChiaoGoos, I think they go up to US 13. I don't know if they go up to US 15. The Lickas go up to US 17, which is 12 millimeters, which is what you need if you're knitting like super bulky yarns. For the Mountain Capelet-ish, I did not go up that high. I used the US 11 or 8 millimeter needle tips, which is what was recommended on the ball band. So since I wasn't following any particular pattern, I just went with what was on the ball band. But I did use the US 17s for another project, which I will talk about in a future episode. So that is one advantage, is that their needle kit goes higher in terms of large needles. The other things that I liked about them were the smooth join between the cord and the needle tip. So unlike ChiaoGoos, which have the screw tip on the end of your needle tip, the Lickas have the screw tip on the end of your cord. So your needle tips, I'll pop one out here, your needle tips just are flat at the end instead of having the little threaded part sticking out like the ChiaoGoos do. So the join is very nice and smooth. I mean, also I was working with super bulky yarn, so it's not as catchy. Like, it doesn't snag as often. I don't know if that would have been different if I was using like a fingering weight or even this, because this is such a soft yarn and it's so pilly. I do wonder if that would catch more, but I found the join to be very, very smooth. And I didn't have a problem with the tips loosening from the cord, which has been an issue with my ChiaoGoo tips, is that kind of every couple of rows I'll have to go and tighten my tips. Now that has decreased in frequency since I have become a somewhat looser knitter. So I suspect that a large part of the problem that I was having was the fact that my stitches were so tight around my needles that they were catching and pulling my needles and untwisting them as I knit. So now that I'm a little bit looser, or a lot bit looser, depending on the project, depending on the day, that doesn't happen to me as much with my Chiagoos. So that is something to keep in mind as well. So those are things that I liked about them. Some of the negatives that I could see are these are wood needles, which some people have had issues with the laminated birch splitting. And so there will be like a big chunk of their needle will just fall off. Now, Knit Picks and like Knitter's Pride tend to have a fairly good return policy. I do not know about these guys. So that would be one concern, especially as you start getting into like the smaller needles. You'd be probably more prone to splitting because they're smaller bits of laminated birch that are stuck together, so they don't have the strength. And some knitters who grip their needles very tightly could snap them, which is one thing when you're paying $10 or $12 or $15 for a set of wood needles, but this set is significantly more expensive than that. These were quite expensive needles when they were first listed, so that would kind of be a real annoyance to me if I snapped it, and then I don't know what their return policy would be on that. So that's another thing to take into consideration. The smallest size in this kit is a US 4, which is a 3.5mm tip. My Chiagoo sets go down farther than that. They go down to like US 3, and I want to say a US 2.5, but don't quote me on that. But then the flip side is obviously the Chiagoos don't go up as high. So I think because the Lyccas have a larger range of larger sizes in their interchangeable sets, they don't include as many of the smaller sizes in their interchangeable sets. So if you wanted those, you can buy them as separate fixed interchangeables. Not fixed interchangeables, as separate fixed needles. I don't know if you can get them as interchangeable needles. The other thing with this needle set is that there is only one size of cord for all your needle tips. So I think that that is also influencing how small they can go. With the Chiagoos, anybody who has a set knows that the small needle tips have one size of cord, the large needle tips have another size of cord, and then they have the mini set, which is like all of your sock sizes for knitting socks and really fine work, and that has like an extra small cord. So I think that that probably also limited how small they could go in the interchangeables. If you're using the same cord for everything, you are limited by how small you can get your connector while also keeping it large enough to be able to handle a needle tip like that. So I think it's probably an engineering problem in more than one respect, in terms of the join and in terms of like the strength of the needles and everything like that. So keep that in mind. And the other thing is that the cord, well, not bad, is not memory free. Now, I am a delicate flower when it comes to memory-free cords because I have used Chiagoos pretty much since the day that I started knitting on circular needles, which was like 2 days after I started knitting, period. So I am very, very used to the memory-free cords. I like being able to pull something out of my kit and have it unroll and have there be no issue. So I mean, obviously this cord is the smallest one, so there's no memory on this. Like, it's perfect. It's just like any other little one. But the longer the cords are, and the longer they have been kind of in your kit, all coiled up, they tend to kind of hold on to their shape a little bit. So for the longer cords, that could be an issue as well. Where you might have to get out your warm water and soak your cords a little bit and stretch them out if they really start to bother you. Now, every long cord, Chiagoo or not, does have a certain amount of kind of spring, I guess, when your cord is really long. Like, people who magic loop know that their cord does not sit perfectly flat and even when they're magic looping. It kind of sticks up a little bit at the end, and that's just the way the cord is. Sorry, I heard something. So they're not bad, but they're not Geogoo memory-free cords either. And again, I don't know how they would compare to like an Addi cord because I've never used an Addi cord. So anyways, those are my thoughts on these needles. I'm going to continue using them for future projects and kind of see how things turn out, but those are my initial thoughts. I did get a really, really good deal on the set. I don't know that I would have spent the money to buy them full price from a store. I especially don't think that I would have purchased them from the US and had them shipped. Anyways, take that with a grain of salt. So, we are kind of rapidly steaming towards the end. So the last thing we're going to talk about is a wolf in sheep's clothing. So this is typically when I talk about yarn or whatever. So because I'm not supposed to be casting on anything that I haven't already cast on and decided not to finish, I decided that I would share with you the yarn that I'm going to be using for my next cast on as soon as my hat is done. This is what I'm going to be casting on. So I'm going to be knitting, I'm finally going to get back to the Miso shawl, which is a pattern by Amba O'Brien. And I'm going to put a picture in here because, again, I don't have it printed out. And I picked my colors, or my color, because I'm doing the 2 skein version of the shawl, and it's a single color shawl. So this is a colorway that was a club colorway last spring. So it is from The Fawn and the Fox, which is dyed by Lara, and she is a dyer from Olds, which is just about an hour north of Calgary. And this is her Magpie base, which is fingering weight. It's 75% superwash merino, 20% nylon, and 5% gold stellina. And it's 400 meters or 438 yards per 100 grams. And the colorway is called Seahorse. So this is the colorway. So look at all that beautiful gold stellina sparkle. And the base is like this really pale aqua, which is just really, really pretty. And then it has all of these other like gorgeous colors. So there's a little bit of pink speckling, and there's blue, and then there's like a bunch of gold and a little bit of orange, and it's just a really, really pretty colorway. So I have a second skein as well. So this is going to be what I cast on next, just because I think the colors are so pretty. The shawl design is quite simple. It doesn't have a lot of complicated lace. It's just eyelets, kind of in a variegated, like in a chevron kind of pattern. So I think this yarn will be really, really pretty. I know that I could use it for socks because it's 75-20 merino nylon, but I don't want to lose all of the gold stellina sparklies in it. So anyways, I'm really excited, and it's just a beautiful springtimey colorway, and it's actually working quite well as a motivator to get me kind of through this hat and have me keep pushing. Oh, look at that pretty blue. So yeah, so Lara is very, very good at dyeing kind of the really soft colors, or kind of almost watercolory, I guess. So that is going to be my next cast on. This base is really nice. It's really, really squishy, very soft, and I like a nice tight twist, and this base has that. So considering that I think this was it was a surprise club. So you knew what base everything was going to be on, but you didn't know what color it was going to be. You didn't kind of have any clue as to what you were going to get. So the fact that this showed up last year was, I mean, it's beautiful. Like, it's really, really pretty. So yeah, that is going to be my next cast on. So I've made it through all of my notes. I've made it through my list of things that I wanted to cover. So I think that is it for today. So thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up below. If you want to leave me any comments, I would love that. Follow me on Instagram, friend me on Ravelry, and we will be knitting friends forever. So I hope that wherever you are, spring is coming, unless you are in the southern hemisphere, in which case fall is coming, I guess. And I will see you next time. Bye.